Well, I am here with one of our favorites, Congressman Joe Wilson. And I am in his office today, and I tell you what, when you look around this office, this is a phenomenal place, Joe. It's a history lesson. We should come back and someday just go through the whole thing. It's phenomenal.
Well, Ann, thank you. And hey, speaking of favorites, you're the favorite. So I appreciate your service and raising issues that are so important. And then, indeed, I am so thrilled that you're here at 2229 Rayburn House Office Building. I invite people all the time from South Carolina, Georgia. Please come by, visit your member of Congress, and then come by. And I do have to point out that as a former intern for Senator Thurmond, I was always impressed that he had his office in such a friendly way, showing the history of his service. And I'm grateful to have the same opportunity so that people from South Carolina can see a political history of the last 40 years.
You know, and that's really important to maintain because with the direction that our country seems to be going here, Joe, I know in this morning's the Washington Post, they were talking about, there's an article about President Obama wanting to normalize relationships, saying that Cuba is not a terrorist threat.
That is so sad, and I'm looking into it now, what the criteria are of identifying a terrorist, a nation that supports terrorism, and sadly, we know that Cuba has, and it's so sad to me that as we're looking at this, and it really relates to the regime in Iran too, and that is that the government of Cuba is not a government as we know it; it's a dictatorship.
Exactly.
The government of Tehran. The regime there is a theocratic dictatorship. It's not elected. And somehow the president is treating these rogue nations that have ideology of murder. Mm-hmm. And they acknowledge it.
Yes.
They proudly proclaim death to America, death to Israel, and they mean it. Our president, it was General Michael Flynn, who's the former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, has said that the president's Congress is willful ignorance.
Willful ignorance. How does that make you feel, Joe?
Well, I'm concerned for the American people because under willful ignorance, there are people crossing our border who clearly will have terrorist ties. We all understand that if a 4-year-old can cross the border, and that any terrorist could have the same opportunity to cross the border and establish an ability to attack the American people. And so I believe that President Obama is putting the American families at risk.
Well, you know, President Obama, when he took office, said that he wanted to transform America. We are, 6 years into his presidency? One of my big concerns is, are we going to be able to turn the tide back? I mean, we talk about it all the time, but he just keeps proceeding and doing more and more.
Well, I believe we can turn the tide. In fact, when Mr. Obama became president, 51% of people, say, in the southern states had Democrat majorities in their state house and Senate. And they had for 125 years. But with the change of the House and Senate in Arkansas last year, a consequence of Mr. Obama's presidency is that every southern state now, from Virginia to Oklahoma and Texas, have a Republican majority in the General Assemblies. In fact, in General Assemblies, this is where people elect local representatives.
Sure.
69 of 99, it's the largest number ever in history, are in conservative control. And then in the House of Representatives, the consequence of the, I consider, extreme policies of this president are that there was the largest Republican majority since 1928. And then a year
But
ago,
are we going to be able, is something going to happen? Because I think in our area particularly, people are a little disappointed in what Congress is doing.
well, and it concerns me in this regard. And hey, a year ago we were told there wouldn't be a conservative majority in the U.S. Senate, but there is.
Right.
And now.
But now they're saying it's not enough, Joe.
Well, and I disagree. And so I'll tell you, I disagree. It is enough. 54, it's majority.
Right.
And Mr. Reid will be gone.
Right.
And he has been the bane of South Carolina. And so, but I see change, positive change coming. And then a classic example, Ann, is that 3 weeks ago now, the House of Representatives passed a budget. And the budget repeals Obamacare, which is on my desk right here. It's an abomination. People are losing their insurance. People are losing their hours of jobs. It has a real negative consequence that people are seeing.
Sure.
But what's happened is that and we also provide for balancing the budget within 10 years. But I found out something. When I got home during the Easter break, over and over again, people kept saying, when do y'all go pass the budget? We're ahead. And so there's so much that actually...
Well, do you think you get bad press out there then?
We get no press.
No press. Well, you get press with me.
Well, no. Except when I'm with Ann Eller.
Right.
And so, but it's somewhat sad that... and the rule of thumb that I run into is that bad news has wings and good news has no feet. And so I'm happy to... And I did in my 2-week... tour of the district from in all counties. I brought up about the different pieces of legislation that we passed, and over again that are very positive.
So, but now this has to go to the Senate.
Goes to the Senate.
And then what happens?
And then I'm really concerned that the 60-vote rule needs to be adjusted, because it just causes ultimate gridlock and an inability for the American people to know there's change.
Well, didn't the Senate, didn't even the Republicans agree to that when the Democrats had the majority?
Yes, but,
okay.
And that is, Mr. Reid did change it for reconciliation purposes, and so I believe that there will be a change soon.
Okay.
And I have a great deal of faith in U.S. Congressman Tom Price of Georgia, chairman of the Budget Committee, and working with Senator Enzi, who's the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. I believe there will be some change. And then I equally believe that South Carolina is going to be in the forefront with Lindsey Graham, with Tim Scott working to get legislation through. And then I'm particularly grateful because I know you have a lot of listeners way across the river. And so people should know that David Perdue and Johnny Isaacson are really valued on the team.
Well, so we think that we can get a change there. But then, of course, we have President Obama who vetoes everything that he doesn't like because he doesn't really need you guys.
Well, and it's so sad to me when he announced in Congress that he was going to rule by pen and phone.
Right.
I was shocked. The Democrats jumped up in applause. And I felt like
you kept your mouth shut, though, Joe.
Well, but it was so sad to me that what happened is that they should have jumped up, applauded, and left because he had just announced that they weren't needed, and so how sad is that? And then with the president's executive actions on amnesty, I really quote him. 22 times he indicated that it was not possible to change the law and that only an emperor could do that.
And then he did it.
And so he called himself an emperor.
Well, we're up here talking about immigration, and what do you think the future is? We keep talking about closing the borders. We don't get them closed. We have laws on the books. They're not enforced.
Yeah, that's it. We have to change the president. Unless we change the president, even if we would have passed new laws, he's not going to enforce it. And then there is the safeguard, as we see. Thank goodness the judiciary is still independent. Now, there's every effort to make it subservient, and so that the president could act unilaterally.
Sure.
That's wrong. And but I'm very pleased that the executive action on amnesty has been blocked, and I'm very hopeful that as it goes through the judicial system, that if it once it gets to the Supreme Court, that indeed it's so clear. The Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, clearly says that naturalization of citizens is the purview of Congress.
Well, we've got immigration issues. We've got Homeland Security. We've got the smallest military getting smaller. What do you think the future of Fort Jackson is? There's been a lot of talk about that. I know you and I have talked about it before, but where is Fort Jackson at?
Well, we've got to be ever vigilant, and Fort Jackson is very important for the training of our personnel. I'm equally interested in promoting Fort Gordon across the river, too. And so both, and Fort Gordon will be the new cyber command, so that's going to give real meaning. At Fort Jackson, we've just got to be ever vigilant, because that's the initial training facility. And as the president is reducing our military personnel with his conduct, equally gruesome is that our adversaries around the world are increasing their personnel. And then it's so sad to me the president will reference the small budgets they have. They're not telling the truth.
Well,
isn't that sad? I mean, that he would even take at face value what the funding, and then how do you judge, say, the funding of a Chinese troop who may be paid?
Well, you're not really going to know, are we?
No,
we're not really going to know.
No, we're not going to know.
Right.
But for our president to be so just intentionally misguided is really sad, and putting the American families at risk.
Are you aware of the fact that in Spartanburg there's talk of a resettlement, a Muslim resettlement community moving in there?
Well, and I have in the past, I can remember a couple of years ago, there was an effort to locate people from Somalia in Casey, South Carolina, and my view was, and they were to be placed at a particular apartment complex. And I, working with the local community, we blocked that because the best way to help people who legally come to our country is not to segregate them into a compound.
Exactly.
It's to allow them to and promote that they would live not in a compound, not in a settlement area, but if they're legally here,
right.
They need to be spread out throughout a community so that they can assimilate and
Don't you think that's the whole idea, Joe, is not to have them assimilate, to have them separate? Don't you see that that's kind of what's happening in our country? We're not one. We used to be a melting pot.
Yes. Well, I'm working for the melting pot. I'm not going to give up.
Right.
And I know something. The melting pot works. And as today is a big day, we have representatives from the Asian American Hotel Owners Association come, HOA. These are people of Indian heritage from South Asia. It is a classic case, Anne, of assimilation. The very first act was of persons who legally came to our country from South Asia was to learn English. And then
that's a good thing, I think.
And then I'm really grateful. In my real estate practice, I represented Asian Americans because my dad had served in India during World War II. So I knew that the persons from South Asia had a business background and they wanted to succeed, and they have. And the Asian American community now owns a majority of the hotels and motels in South Carolina, providing tens of thousands of jobs to American citizens.
Are they legal jobs?
All legal.
They all are legal?
All legal.
Okay.
Because they understand the benefits of legal immigration. That is them.
Right. Well, the tourist industry and the farming industry has big problems and says they need the import visas to import people to do the jobs here.
Well, that's and I would support temporary guest worker permit. And we do have seasonal employment. We understand that as the peaches come to...
Right. But the farmers are saying that they can't get them quick enough, that there's a lot of red tape to getting people.
No, and sadly, this administration has not helped. And in fact, to have a system that works, you've got to have sufficient personnel in the home country. And this administration intentionally has not provided for sufficient consular personnel to assist for temporary guest worker permit, where people come to the United States and then return home.
Right.
And they also send remittances back to their families, and so it's a really positive situation.
Right. Well, as we wind this up, because I know that we're going to have to wind this up, I see all the people coming in here today, Joe. But as we wind this up, we're talking about immigration, we're talking about secure homeland security. What would you like our listeners really to know, Joe?
Well, the first thing is that I'm very concerned about the security of the American people.
There was just a little helicopter that landed out there on the lawn out there.
Well, I'm concerned that the president is not recognizing the direct threats to the American people. The dictators of Iran clearly indicate every day their view of death to America, death to Israel. That's what they mean. This is not, by proceeding with the ability to develop a nuclear bomb, by proceeding with the ability to develop an intercontinental ballistic missile system, we are the target. And somehow our president has just missed it. And weakness. He calls it a legacy of engagement. I call it clearly a legacy of weakness. The weakness of his conduct in Cuba is that since he announced his engagement, 800 people have been arrested as political prisoners. Since he did his engagement in Russia, thousands of people have been killed due to the policies in Ukraine. Due to his weakness by not having a status of forces agreement in Iraq, ISIL has developed with, again, thousands of Christians being killed and thousands of Muslims being killed. And so over and over again, and now the weakness with Iran is putting the entire American population at risk.
You think Congress is going to be able to do something about Iran and the contract? I
do, and I'm really encouraged that the president had very arrogantly indicated, can you imagine, that the Congress should not have a role, that the United Nations should be determining the security of the American people, okay? That's bizarre. And so I'm very grateful that the American people spoke up. And so I was very pleased that Senator Tom Cotton, the new Republican from Arkansas, stepped forward, and then that forced the Democrats in the U.S. Senate to come on board. They didn't want to, but the American people stood up and spoke up. And then I'm very grateful in the House of Representatives, 340 members, virtually every Republican, and a majority of Democrats have spoken up and said that there should be a congressional role. And obviously, I'll be very clear, I have no faith in Secretary of State John Kerry. Okay, his negotiating capabilities, I think, are worse than pitiful. And then, of course, the president, his whole goal is weakness.
Absolutely. Well, listen, you know what? It has been a real treat to be here today.
No, this
Thank
is wonderful.
You so
and
much.
I thought you'd been to the office before. I've invited you 100 times.
Well, this has been terrific, and I really thank you so much.
Well, and I love having people come by, and this really does have a lot of South Carolina history to it, and I urge people visit you with your member of Congress.
And come by and see Joe, too.
Good people like Jeff Duncan, and then come by and see me. Thank you.
Thank you.
And hey, and Rick Allen across the river, too. We're very fortunate.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You.